My story starts off 15 years ago, July 30th, 2008. Man, 15 years ago, I'm a full-blown meth addict, and I'm the head of an organized crime ring that operates throughout the entire metroplex of Dallas. I'm the top criminal on the criminal pyramid, the shot caller. They took me to jail that day. They processed me in. They set my bond at $1.4 million. And they brought me back into the courtroom. They read the sentence out loud. Damon West, you are hereby sentenced to 65 years in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice.
111, 110.
You training to be a street cop?
Hey guys, welcome to this episode of the Street Cop Training Podcast. I'm your host, founder, and CEO of Street Cop Training. My name is Dennis Benino, and today we have with us a guy who I actually saw at a Andy Frisella, Ed Milet business development event called Arate Syndicate. Plug for them because those guys deserve it. And it was in Nashville. Was it 2 years ago now you did that? It was almost
1 year.
Years.
1 year.
It
was last November, actually.
No shit. So
Yeah.
it took me a year to get you here. So you came out and talked in front of a couple thousand people. How many people were at that event? 2,000, 3,000?
Yeah, probably about 3,000. There's probably another like 3,000 or 4,000 online. Man, Andy and Ed have massive events. That Arate just exploded, brother. It's incredible what they built.
Well, they're phenomenal human beings, and both of those guys have had impact in my life, and so I'm elated. Actually, couldn't go to the last one. My friend, who's super successful, reached out to me. He's like, "Dude, you want to go to this one?" And it actually happened to fall on we have an annual conference every year. So unfortunately, the one they did in May, I couldn't make it to. I'm sorry, and or April, whatever it was. But I'm looking forward to going more of them because it was excellent, and I thought your speech was really good, and so I literally DM'd or texted my podcast producer, and I was like, "Yo, get Damon West on here, man. He's good. I think he's gonna be good for the law enforcement community." And before we started, he said he really likes talking to the law enforcement community to try to clear some of the air up. And I think that's really what we do at this company, just to give some context. So without further ado, I know your story, but maybe you could tell some people a little story of the Damon West adventures.
Yeah, man. Look, and Dennis, thanks a lot for having me on, man. I do think it's important for law enforcement to hear this story. And I think it's important for them to see examples of people that got it right, because frankly, you see a lot of examples the other way around. In law enforcement, it's very easy to get disgruntled. It's very easy to become negative. You take out the same trash over and over sometimes, the same people on the street. But every now and then, there's a person out there that law enforcement encounters, and it's not just an arrest. It's more of a rescue. That's my story. My story starts off 15 years ago, July 30th, 2008. On that day, I was sitting around this little rundown apartment in Dallas, Texas, and sitting next to me on that couch in that rundown apartment was my meth dealer, this guy named Tex. Because 15 years ago, Dennis, I'm not the clean-cut, polished-looking guy you see in front of you with all these best-selling books, movie deal, family man, businessman, college professor. Man, 15 years ago, I'm a full-blown meth addict, and I'm the head of an organized crime ring that operates throughout the entire metroplex of Dallas. I'm the top criminal on the criminal pyramid, the shot caller. So on that couch that day, I'm sitting there with my dope dealer, and I'm telling my dope dealer, man, you got to get out of here. You don't want to be here. The cops are closing in on me. The end is near. Because 10 days before this, Dennis, they picked up my partner in crime, this guy named Dustin. And you know how a crime works, brother. They get one guy in custody, they can get all the people in custody. It's just a chain reaction. And just about that time, the window on my right blows out and shatters, and then tumbling across that living room floor was a little canister going end over end, smoking on one side. Man, I've seen that movie before. I know what's going down, and I tried to get out of that living room as fast as I could, but it was too late. You know how it goes. Boom! Blows up in my face. The flashbang grenade's a bright white light, loud noise, blows me back on the couch. And when I came to, when I can see and hear again, there was a cop standing over me in full SWAT riot gear. His boot was on my chest, the barrel of an assault rifle right there by my eye socket, and he's screaming at the top of his lungs, "Don't move, don't move." And man, all I could think to say to this SWAT guy was, "Don't worry, don't worry." And then one of the SWAT guys screamed out loud, "We got him. We got the Uptown Burglar." And that's the moniker. That's the name I'll live with for the rest of my life. Dennis, the Uptown Burglar. About a dozen other meth addicts and myself, young and old, male and female, black and white, and everything in between, because drugs and addiction do not discriminate, but we indiscriminately and without reservation broke into the homes of dozens and dozens of people in the uptown neighborhood of Dallas and beyond to feed our insatiable meth habits. But on July 30th, 2008, the Uptown burglaries came to an end. They took me to jail that day. They processed me in. They set my bond at $1.4 million. So that's a no bond. And a year later, I go to my trial. The trial lasts 6 days, Dennis. And these are property crimes. No one was ever home during these burglaries. Never saw my victims. They never saw me. No one was physically hurt. No weapons were used. These are property crimes around meth. But the jury, after 6 days of overwhelming evidence of my guilt, they go to deliberate for 10 minutes. And the charge is engaging organized criminal activity, RICO. It's a RICO case, and I'm the mastermind. And, man, they go to deliberate for 10 minutes, Dennis. And that's a terrible sign for the guy at the defendant table. And they brought me back into the courtroom. They read the sentence out loud. Damon Joseph West, you are hereby sentenced to 65 years in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. 65 years in Texas, Dennis, is a life sentence. The jury gave me life that day. So that's where we start this podcast off right now. This guy named Damon West gets sentenced to life in prison for engaging in organized crime. In the year 2009, goes into the Texas Department of Criminal Justice to begin serving that life sentence. And right now, when we're shooting this in 2023, I've been out of prison for 8 years on parole. Now, I'm on parole for the rest of my life. I'm on parole to the year 2073. But it's what happened those 7 years inside that prison that really is the story here, right? Because you don't see a lot of cases like that, Dennis.
Before we go into that, because the story is really good, and that's why I wanted to have you on here. How did you get into drugs?
You know, whenever I was younger, when I was 10, took my first drink of beer from my dad's beer in the fridge. 12, I smoked my first joint. But I really got into hardcore drugs when I was in college. I was a Division I college quarterback at the University of North Texas, starting quarterback. And then I got injured against Texas A&M in 96. I was 20 years old. My career was over. And I got into substance abuse, hardcore, cocaine, ecstasy pills, because I couldn't live life on life's terms. And I think that's the hallmark for all addicts. And I think that's what one of the things is that I get to explain to law enforcement and generally everybody, because I think most people don't understand the disease of addiction. Dennis, I never, ever met anybody in prison, in the rooms of recovery, anywhere, that ever said, hey, I want to grow up and be an addict, an alcoholic, a thief, a burglar, you know. I became all those things. But me, I mean, I wanted to be Jerry Maguire before Jerry Maguire was Jerry Maguire. You know, everybody had aspirations to do something different in life. But addiction is very powerful. And my addiction started getting hardcore in college. But I was a functional addict. I graduated college, moved off to Washington, D.C., worked in Congress, worked for a guy running for president. Then in 2004, I take a job at one of the biggest Wall Street banks in the world in Dallas, Texas, UBS, United Bank of Switzerland. And it was at that job that another stockbroker in 2004 introduced me to methamphetamine for the first time.
Wow.
Yeah, I was sleeping at work, man. He said, you know, you can't sleep on this job. So he took me to the parking garage and he gave me my first hit of meth. I smoked it.
Wow.
And I was instantly hooked. And that drug, man, it's the most evil, most destructive, most addictive drug ever created by man. I mean, this stuff is made in a lab. It's made to get you hooked. And anybody in law enforcement listening to this, you know how insidious that drug is. I tell people all the time that theft and meth go together like rats and trash. I mean, you can take that to the bank. It's an axiom. And I became a meth addict. And it took about 18 months from the first hit of that pipe to go from working on Wall Street to living on the streets of Dallas, Texas. Homeless, man. And I live in dope houses. I sleep in cars. And it started off with petty crimes first, students. It's not like I just broke out of the gate breaking into people's houses. I started off with shoplifting, breaking into cars, breaking into storage units, did a few grand theft autos. But then I started breaking into people's homes. And, you know, I tell people this all the time. My burglaries, when I broke into people's homes, I didn't just steal my victim's property. I stole something way more valuable from my victims, something I don't think my victims will ever get back. That's their sense of security. I mean, they live with that for the rest of their lives. The state of Texas says I can't even apologize to my victims. To apologize to your victims is a felony, and you go back to prison for it. So, I mean, they're going to live with that for the rest of their lives. But after 3 years of committing property crimes against the people of Dallas, the Dallas SWAT team on July 30th, 2008, put an end to the Uptown burglaries the day that SWAT arrested me. Or the shift in mindset that I talk about when I go around speaking all over the world about this story. July 30th, 2008, that's not just the day that I was arrested. That was the day I was rescued. I tell people that all the time. The angels in my story, Dennis, they don't have wings. My angels, they have assault rifles, shields, helmets. They came through the window. They busted the door off the hinges, man. They pulled me out of that world that I was in. The Dallas SWAT team saved my life that day. And incidentally, very new to the story, in September, this past September, I finally got a chance to go in front of SWAT, the same men and women that took me down in Dallas, the Dallas SWAT team, and speak to them, tell them my story, thank them for saving my life that day. And I actually got to make a contribution to their fund that they have where they buy new equipment out of. So what was really interesting too about that, Dennis, is that after talking to SWAT, it was interesting because the body language of a lot of the SWAT officers when I go into that room, it's not good, brother. I mean, this is like, some of them don't want to be there. They feel like it's kind of a hug-a-thug deal, right? So, but by the end of this presentation, and thank you that I got to do with them, there were no strings attached. I said, hey, man, look, I got a table back there. I've got my books. I'm giving them every book away y'all want. Come see me if you want. No big deal if you don't. I mean, I think almost the entire room came up there. Almost 40 of them came up. And they were like, man, that's really cool that you came and did that. No one's ever come and said thanks. And a lot of the SWAT guys are like, we don't even know what happens to a person after we bag them and arrest them. And we just go on to the next person. And unfortunately, there's a lot of work for SWAT to do. So they had no idea about what happened to me after that day. And some of those officers in that room were on that raid. But they unanimously, I mean, with every single man and woman in there thanked me for coming in there and just telling them thanks, because they don't get that a lot. And the other part is, like what we're doing today, is they don't see the example of someone that got it right. I mean, it's hard to see that example. And that's one of the reasons I think God got me out of that place in the first place, man. I think that I'm supposed to be out there being that example for other addicts, for other men and women that are incarcerated, and for law enforcement officers to see the one, because everybody wants to know that their job matters.
I think, speaking on behalf of a lot of law enforcement officers in this country, nothing warms the heart of law enforcement more than somebody actually getting their act together, getting it right, and getting out and really making the change. Because, I do think they get jaded. I think they get just hopeless in some sense, cyclical, the same thing over and over again. But the reality is, I would imagine a majority of cops, minus some of the real disgruntled fucks out there, would be thrilled to learn that somebody that they had no idea was going to change their life, and actually, learn their lessons, not a good word. I think just had their life changed for the better and essentially were rescued. When did you realize that intervention of being arrested was actually a blessing in disguise? I mean, it had to be some time, because I can't imagine what you felt like hearing your life had been ended.
Yeah, I didn't have it right away. I'm going to tell you, it took me a while to get into prison. I had to get into prison first, and I had to transform myself. But I had a little help along the way. And this is the help I think that this message that I got from another inmate, I think it'll help law enforcement that's listening to this. I know it does. I mean, I know it helps people. I mean, this is why people bring me in to share this story. Right after my trial was over, my mom and my dad are allowed to visit with me for like 5 minutes off the side of the courtroom behind a bulletproof glass. And my mom makes me promise that I won't get into one of these Aryan Brotherhood gangs, and I won't get any tattoos. So she tells me no gangs, no tattoos. Come back as the man we raised, or don't come back at all. And I don't know how I'm going to do this, Dennis. I mean, I have no clue. I've never been to prison before. And everybody I'm talking to in county jail is telling me, man, the prison bus is coming to pick you up. You're going to get on it, and you have to get into a gang when you get to prison. You're going to the worst part of prison where everybody's got life. But there was this one guy, this old black guy that was so different, man. His name was Muhammad. And Muhammad was what you call a career criminal, man. He's been in and out of prison his entire life. But he was the most positive guy I've ever met in my life. And he's telling me what the dynamic was in prison about race, that everything is about race in there. The inmates want it to be about race. So you're going to fight the white gangs first, then you're going to fight the black gangs. And if you survive that, you'll earn the right to walk alone. But he told me, he said, here's how you're going to deal with prison. He said, I want you to imagine prison as a pot of boiling water. And he said, in that pot of boiling water, we're going to put 3 things and watch how they respond to this pot of boiling water. We're going to put a carrot, an egg, and a coffee bean. And so he walks me through it. A carrot in a pot of boiling water goes in hard and becomes soft. The egg in the same pot of boiling water goes in there with that hard outer shell, that soft liquid inside. But prison changes the egg on the inside, turns that soft inside hard. His heart becomes hardened. He said, but a coffee bean in the same pot of boiling water changes the pot of boiling water into a pot of coffee. And he told me, the coffee bean was the only thing that will change the water. It's the change agent. He said the coffee bean had the power inside of it to change the world around it. He said, so you're going to have to be like a coffee bean inside that pot of boiling water called prison. You have to change the environment from the inside out, not let the outside in influence you. And I remember how I felt, Dennis, when he told me this. I felt empowered because it put the power back inside me. And if the power was inside me, man, it wasn't in the hands of the criminal justice system, the guards, the other inmates. It was in me. And if I keep the power inside me, man, I don't just survive prison. I could thrive inside of a prison. It was the most empowering message I've ever heard in my entire life. And I got a chance to take it to the biggest pot of boiling water there was, a maximum security, a supermax. That's what it was. I went to a supermax prison in the state of Texas. Dennis, it worked. It worked. I mean, like the coffee bean message turned out to be the perfect message for me inside that pot of boiling water. Because after I established myself, it took a couple of months to establish myself inside of a prison. Prison was hard. It's the hardest thing I've ever been through. But I started learning the ways to be a coffee bean. I started discovering how I could transform that pot of boiling water from the inside out. And, you know, when parole comes to see me in 2015, the lady from parole, you know, she interviews me. She's like, hey, look, I'm here to interview you because you didn't just change yourself inside this prison. You changed the entire prison. And that was what I was hoping to hear, you know, Dennis, because if I could get their attention, I had to do something very different to get their attention, to get out of prison early, man. I've got a life sentence. They can let me out at 7 years, but they don't have to. But the lady was like, look, you didn't just change yourself. You changed the entire prison. And she was like, how did you do that? How did you change the entire prison around you? And I told her I did that with my smile, because I learned from Muhammad. He said, you either infect a room when you walk into it with your negative energy, or you affect a room with positive energy. You know, he was one of the most intelligent men I've ever met. And I meet this guy in Dallas County Jail, man, in a dungeon. But he transfers to me this incredible wisdom of the message of the coffee bean and how energy changes the world around you and the world inside you. And the lady from parole concluded the interview. She said, look, I've got one question. And this one question is going to decide whether or not you go home or you stay in prison. She said, if you could be remembered for being anything in life, anything at all, she said, tell me what that would be in just one word. Go. And man, I was like, useful. I just want to be useful. And I told her, I said, I could be useful inside this prison, as you've already seen, or I could be useful out in the free world, finding more coffee beans. And in November 16th, 2015, 8 years ago from when we're recording this, I walked out of a Texas prison. And I'm not free. Like I tell people all the time, man, I got a little more time left on parole in Texas. I'm on parole to the year 2073, Dennis. So I've got 50 more years left on parole. And every month I see my parole officer, but I'm not worried about that parole because I'm a coffee bean, brother. And the only way I'm going back to prison is how I went to a prison this morning, right here in Beaumont, Texas. I shared this story with the men and women inside the institution. I walk out the front gate of all those prisons today because I'm a coffee bean. And that's what the coffee bean message is about. Transforming the world around you with the power inside you. The ways of becoming a coffee bean, you know, there's a lot of them, man. I started learning this inside of a prison, but it's expanded as I've gotten out. And as the success grows with the message and my books reach more and more people, I hear from more and more people in the community about how they become coffee beans too. It's really kind of an incredible thing, Dennis, to just sit back and watch. 8 years ago, I was sitting inside of a cell serving life. Today, I've got a life worth living.
What was it like to be informed that you made parole?
Brother, my mom, I called my mom from prison that day. I tell you the day, it was May 1st, 2015. And it was on a Friday. Called my mom because my parents came to see me a lot in prison. I lived in a prison that was really close to my hometown. Parents came to see me a lot. And so I called my mom that Friday from the day room phone. And I was talking to her about, you know, them coming to see me on Saturday. And she said, Damon, I need to talk to you about something. She said, I just checked the parole website. And immediately I was like, man, I'm sorry, Mom, because I thought I didn't make it because no one makes their first parole. And I was like, I was apologizing. Like, I'm sorry, Mom. We'll do better next year. I'm coming up with all the reasons why I want to make it okay for her. And she's like, baby, you made it. You made parole. The nightmare's over. You're coming home. Bro, I started crying on the phone in the day room. And man, listen, this is not the environment you want to cry in, man. This is not something permissible inside of a level 5, you know, supermax prison. And I immediately caught myself. I knew what I'd done wrong, but it was too late. Everybody in the day room saw me crying on the phone. So I tried to straighten myself out, hung up the phone, ran back to the chapel because that's where I worked. I worked in the chapel. And I told the chaplain and all the guys I worked with what had just happened. Sorry, my dog. What had just happened. And so the guys in the chapel were like, man, we got to figure out a story for you. Just tell them, because my grandmothers were both dead. Just say one of your grandmothers died and they called you on the chapel. So I get back to my pod that day and I go to my bunk. I live in the dorms at this point. I go to the bunk and I see these Aryan Brotherhood guys coming from my bunk. And I'm like, shit, they're coming for me, you know? And one of the guys said, hey, Wes, congratulations. I'm like, about what? And he said that you made parole. And I'm like, what are you talking about, man? And they said, one of the guys in the tank had saw me crying on the phone. And so he called his mom and had his mom check my parole status online. This is how devious these dudes are in there, man. So, so everybody in the prison knows you made parole now. And I'm like, damn. And I thought, because you can't get any more trouble. Dennis, if you get into a fight or anything like that after you made parole, you lose your parole. You got to follow all the rules to a T. And it's like a tightrope you got to watch. You got to walk. Because once you made parole, if anybody's got any beef with you, that's when they're going to come after you because they don't want you getting out. So there's a lot of people in prison that don't want anybody else getting out if they're not getting out too. And that's what the Aryan Brotherhood guys told me. Hey, man, look, we got no beef with you. All that was settled when you walked into prison and fought for your right to exist. But here's the deal, man. You can't leave your bunk except to go to work. You can't go to the chow hall. You can't go to the rec yard anymore. There's just nowhere you can go that's safe because people are going to be coming after you. And they asked me, said, how much food do you have in your locker? And I kind of did an inventory real quick. And I had enough to last me about 2 weeks. And they said, that's when the prison bus will get you within 2 weeks. So you want to be able to survive in the cell without leaving. And if you need more food, come see us. We got more food. So really, in reality, these guys I thought were coming to hurt me. They were coming to help me. And Dennis, I never did go back to the chow hall again. I never went back to the rec yard the rest of the time in prison. It was 2 weeks later to the day that the prison bus came to pick me up. But yeah, man, and they took me to a 6-month program, in prison therapeutic community program. And after that was over, 6 months later, I walked out of that prison, man. I was free. Well, free as you can be on parole, right?
How anxious are you when you hear that you've made parole, but you're sitting around for 2 weeks waiting for it to happen?
Dude, like, it's like, I mean, look, man, the thing about doing time is they say this, all the convicts tell you, you got to do your time. You can't let your time do you. So what that means is you got to keep yourself busy and do your time the right way. Because if you have a routine and you stick to it, your time goes by like normal. You have a job, you have friends, you hang out, you watch TV, whatever, read books. But if you don't have a routine, time goes by slow. And that last 2 weeks, man, my routine was all messed up because now I'm not going to rec. I'm not walking around the unit, nothing like that. I go to work at the chapel, come back for 2 weeks. It's the longest 2 weeks ever. And it was the hardest time I ever had to do.
And so the 6-month inpatient, that was minimum security, but you had to stay?
Yeah. So, man, that 6-month inpatient it's kind of crazy, man. So it's a unit where they send you to about 630 guys on the unit, as opposed to 3,000 where I just left the Supermax. But those 630 guys in that unit, man, everybody's made parole. And so the thing is, when you walk in the door, they tell you that the cardinal rule in that place is no fighting. If you fight, you go back to prison. What they're trying to do is detox you from prison. It's a in-prison therapeutic community. They want you to get used to dealing with people without, punching your problems. And man, it was a hard 6 months because then the respect, violence, Dennis, or the threat of violence, that's the glue that holds prison together. That's what holds prison together, man. The threat that if I do something wrong, if I disrespect somebody, it can cost me my life or it can cost me a limb, whatever. And so when that is gone, you had just a chaotic world, which kind of resembles the free world out here, because you can't just go punch your problems out here either. And that's what they want you to get used to, not being able to just beat the shit out of your problems. And so, yeah, it was a hard 6 months to do that. The guys disrespected each other unlike anything I've ever seen inside that place. But, whenever I got out of prison, I noticed that people act like that too, especially people on social media and online. People get behind a keyboard, Dennis, and they say stuff that you would never say to someone's face. Get your head taken off for talking like that. But, man, it's a crazy world out here. And I'm glad I got to go through that last 6 months because it really conditioned me for some of the knuckleheads you run into out in the free world.
It's funny that you bring that up because obviously it's so interesting the world wants this more professional police officer, this compassion-based police work, and these empathetic police officers, and those in the field who know the law and know how to apply it, know how to stop crime and do it professionally. And dude, we do all those things. Like, the goal of this company is to take on that project. And we're doing a really good job at beginning to implement an overhaul of the whole thing. Now, some people don't like it in the profession, but outside of the profession, the noisiest people are those who have no context of what we're actually trying to do. Right. And I will say this, recently, we have had a couple of viral videos on TikTok go really hard. And the only reason there hasn't been, I have no bullshit. There is not one comment on there that is a negative comment. And I'm like, only because it's just something completely different than the things that we're doing. And it's about asking your non-strict boss hypothetical questions. It's like this funny thing. And we get millions of views on it. And so it's the only time I've seen people enter into a conversation with nice things to say, and it refreshes the world. So there's a little coffee bean action there, right? People are seeing that there's bosses out there who take care of their people. They've got good relationships with their people. But yeah, man, I have learned one thing, and I put it out there and I ignore it. I don't really get involved in the back and forth on social media. But what's the day? What was it like the day you walked out of prison? Your parents had to pick you up?
Yeah, so they were waiting out of the gate to pick me up, man. It was very emotional. And they put me in the car. Dude, the first thing I wanted to do was get some Whataburger. You got Whataburgers where you live?
We don't, but I travel, and I'm gonna sit here and I'm gonna stand my ground and say, the In-N-Out Whataburger debate is, I don't understand it because I think they're in two different worlds. I think Whataburger's Burger King.
Yeah, really?
I'm sorry, dude. I think In-N-Out's amazing.
In-N-Out's great, man. I got nothing against In-N-Out. I love it. John Gordon, my co-author and good friend, he does a lot of work with In-N-Out, man. So he's always on the In-N-Out side of the debate with Whataburger. Yeah. But that was the first thing I wanted to get when I got out of prison, man. So, everybody's got a meal they want to get. A lot of guys like pizza or chicken or something like that, man. I got Whataburger. Came home, and I lived in my parents' spare bedroom, man. And that's what life was like the first couple of years I was out of prison, man. 40 years old, out of prison, on parole for life, living in my parents' spare bedroom, making minimum wage. It's like,
where were you working? What were you doing?
I worked at a law firm, man. I got a job. I did my own legal work when I was in prison, and these other lawyers took notice to it. And man, when they looked at my writ that I wrote when I was in prison, I was trying to get myself out. I mean, that's like an axiom. Everybody in prison wants out. And so they looked at this writ that I put together, and they got in touch with me and said, man, you put together a hell of a writ for a guy that's never been to law school. If you ever get out of prison one day, come see us. We got a job for you. And so right when I got out of prison, I worked at one of the most prestigious law firms in Texas, man. I was a paralegal. Wow. Great job. Yeah. Best thing about that job is it was instant validation, right? These prestigious people that work at this firm put their stamp on me and said, Damon West is okay with us. Day 2 out of prison, brother. I mean, instant validation for a guy that needed it, man. So, yeah, it was great, man. Didn't pay a lot financially, but it paid a lot in a lot of other ways. It was my stepping stone to a new life. I mean, they helped create this guy that I am today. I worked there for 5 years out of prison.
That's interesting. So are you feeling frustrated living at your parents' house in the spare bedroom? Were you able to drive? Like, what was life like as you came back into things?
Yeah, man. So, was there frustrating days? Sure. I tried to focus on the gratitude, man. Here's the deal. Frustrating days, maybe. Bad days, zero. In fact, I can tell you that since I've been out of prison, I've had 0 bad days since I've gotten out, because I use perspective, and everybody has perspective in life, but we don't always use perspective. We've got to be able to compare what a real bad day is versus what we're facing in front of us. Bad days are classified like someone dies, a bankruptcy, a job is lost, a marriage dissolves. Those are bad days. Most days aren't one of those. They're just days that aren't so good. So do I have bad days? Absolutely not, because every day that I wake up and my feet don't hit the cold concrete floor of the prison cell, I'm winning, brother. I'm going to have a good day. So, yeah, that's my metric, man. That's what I measure my days with. So were some of the days frustrating? Sure they were, man. Living in your parents' spare bedroom when you're 40 years old, it does a lot to your social life, so it's not, but it's a give and take. I lived in prison, so I mean, that's the alternative for me. It's like people ask me, Dennis, about being on parole for 50 years. How do you do it? What's that like? Well, it's not bad. It's actually pretty good. I think it's a privilege to be on parole like that for the rest of my life. Because here's the alternative. I could be in prison still. Texas could have kept me for 65 years if they wanted to, but they let me go in 7. So my zest for life is over the top because I get to have this life outside of prison.
Were your parents giving you a hard time at all? Were they judgmental? Were they breaking chops in the sense of, kind of making you feel like a teenager again because you live in the house? Or they treat you with respect?
Yeah. So my mom would ask me a lot of times, what time are you going to be home? If I was, and I wasn't going to bars and clubs and stuff like that. I'm going to an AA meeting, man. And, I'd go work out. I didn't have a lot of stuff going on in my life, but man, having to answer my mom again, what time are you going to be home? But I had to remind myself, I did that to these people, man. I put them through hell. They visited me over 150 times when I was in prison, man. Over 150 visits, dude. I mean, no one got that many visits in prison. I mean, so yeah, was it frustrating having your mom, or if you're, an hour late, your mom calls your phone? And I mean, yeah, this is going on when I'm 40, 41 years old, but I had to remind myself I did that to them. So even when I got frustrated, Dennis, I just compartmentalized it and understood that was part of me. I did that. Here's the thing. I work a program of recovery called AA. And in AA, we have to understand our role in our problems, because we had this axiom in AA. It says, whenever I'm disturbed, there's something wrong with me. That means any problem I have, I play a role in that problem somewhere. And so I have to figure out what my role is in all my problems, because if I can find that one thing, that's the only thing I can fix. That's the only thing I can change. That's the only part that I can control about my problems. Most of your problems are out of your control, but if you find out the role you play in your problem, that's the thing you can control. So I'm always looking for, when something irritates me, something bothers me, no matter what it is in life. Say it's something politically, and I won't get into where I am politically, but if something bothers me that I see, I'll ask myself, why does that bother you, Damon? Let's figure out, why that bothers you. What role do I play in that? And that's the part that I work on every single day with every single problem.
So you're into your mid-40s, you're living at home, spare bedroom in your parents' house. When does the world start recognizing and giving you some additional opportunity? What was the first time that you were able to start spreading some messages?
Man, so whenever I got out, I had this dream of sharing the story in front of audiences and speaking. But I found out real quick that you can't go knock on the door of a school and say, I just got out of prison, I want to talk to your kids.
Right.
That's a bad formula. And I tried it, but it doesn't work. So I had to find people that would believe in me, that were pillars of society. And I found a cop and a judge. And this cop and this judge would take me into schools as part of a not scared straight, but a warning to others about the dangers of drugs, the consequence of bad decisions. That's how this presentation started. And there weren't a ton of places for me to speak in the first couple of years I was out of prison. But in my parents' spare bedroom, there was a mirror in there. And it just happened to be there whenever I moved in. So every night for 2 years, I would practice my presentation in front of that mirror. The same presentation I'm out there giving today to audiences all over the world was born inside of my parents' spare bedroom in front of a mirror, Dennis, because I didn't have audiences, but I had to get in my reps. Anything you want to be good at in life, you have to get in your reps. And so I practiced this presentation, waiting for the opportunity to one day share it in front of the right audience. And it came. The right audience came almost 2 years I was out of prison. It was August 1st, 2017. I got a chance to go speak to the Clemson Tigers. I met Dabo Swinney one night at an award show in Houston. There were 8 coaches in the room. It was the Bear Bryant Coach of the Year award. 8 coaches in the room that night. And I went around to all 8 of these coaches and shook their hand and gave them my pitch of why they should bring me in to talk to their team. And every coach I met that night slammed the door in my face and told me no, except for Dabo Swinney, the one coach that said yes. And after I spoke to Dabo's team on August 1st, 2017, Dabo kicked open the door to college football. I mean, I'm getting calls from Nick Saban's guy, Kirby Smart's guy, Lincoln Riley, Chip Kelly, Every coach in America calls me. I've spoken to almost every Power 5 program. Then Dabo introduces me to a guy named John Gordon. John Gordon's one of the biggest motivational speakers and authors in America, man. The guy that wrote The Energy Bus, the guy that I followed on social media for my inspiration, calls me out of the blue one day to tell me that Dabo had just told him my story. And John's a massive author, Dennis. He's like, hey, Damon, the world needs your coffee bean message. Let's deliver it to the world. Let's write a book. We'll call it The Coffee Bean. And in 2019, 10 years after I first heard the story from Muhammad in Dallas County Jail, the book, The Coffee Bean, came out, took the world by storm. Not just America, man. It was a bestseller in America for like 4 to 6 weeks, jumps over to the other continents. It goes off and gets a global publishing deal. It's in every language in the world now. Chinese, Spanish, Arabic, French, Italian, German, all these different languages have the book, The Coffee Bean, on their shelf. But my big moment was speaking of Dabo Swinney's football team in 2017, because Dabo changed my entire life by being a connector. One of the best things I've ever learned from my good friend Dabo, because we're really good, really close now. But Dabo is a servant leader. He's a connector. He's authentic. He's real. He's just as advertised you see him on TV, man. He's the real deal. So, yeah, man, Dabo Swinney, one of my best friends.
What happened to Muhammad?
Good question, man. It's the most frequent question I ever get, too. Muhammad's not his real name. That's his Muslim name. When guys go to prison and they convert to Islam, they get rid of their real name. They take on a Muslim name. Or a guy that converts to Islam in general, like Cassius Clay. Cassius Clay converted to Islam and he became Muhammad Ali. So this Muhammad guy, I get out of prison. I go back to Dallas County Jail, and I'm asking around for this guy named Muhammad. And Dallas County Jail was like, man, we just don't have people logged in by their Muslim name. We need a real name or a birth date. So I had to hope that one day he would find me, and it took 7 years, but he finally found me. And he found me in the form of another inmate in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. I got a letter last summer from this inmate. And the letter didn't have a return address on it, so I couldn't write the inmate back, but it had one sentence inside that letter: find James Lynn Baker and you find Muhammad. So it's clearly an inmate that's read my books or listened to my podcast or something like that while he's in prison. So I go to Dallas, get a private investigator. We find James Lynn Baker's criminal record. Matched everything he told me county jail. In and out of prison his entire life. Had him in Dallas County Jail in 2009 when I was there. So I know this is him, but I never got to see him again. I never got to thank him in person again, because James Lynn Baker II, Muhammad, he died May 9th, 2017 in Dallas, Texas, of an opiate overdose.
Wow.
He's been dead for over 6 years. So I got to do something, though, Dennis, to honor this guy, because I'm not here today without him. And this is the part of life about integrity, man. That Dabo's taught me. Integrity is who you are when no one else is watching. I've got to do something to honor him. So I'll go find his family. And he comes from a really dynamic family. Like, his little sister was the first Dallas Cowboy cheerleader ever, 1972.
Whoa.
His mother started the first black daycare in Dallas, 1948. So
wow.
Came from an incredible family. So I reach out to, he's got 3 living sisters. I reach out to the sisters one night, told them the story about the time that I met their brother in Dallas County Jail in 2009, the message he gave me and what I was able to do with that message, both in prison and out of prison. And I told him, I said, listen, I don't know what your feelings are about your brother and the choices he made in life, but you need to understand your brother impacted at least one person while he was on this planet. And that one person, me, I'm going to impact the entire planet with the message he gave me. And that's when I asked him, I said, what high school did y'all go to growing up? Because when I was in county jail with him, he told me he was from the inner city, very poor, very run down part of the city. And they confirmed that. They told me they went to Dallas Lincoln High School, which is South Dallas, man. This is as inner city as you get. So I said, great. Here's what I want to do at Dallas Lincoln High School. Every year, I'm going to put $10,000 into a trust for a scholarship in your brother's name. We'll call it the James Lynn Baker II Be a Coffee Bean Scholarship. And I would love for your family to pick the winner of that scholarship every year, so that every year, one little boy or one little girl that grows up in his old neighborhood, goes to his old high school, they get a better chance at life through an education, because these two guys met up in Dallas County Jail back in 2009. Dennis, the sisters just picked the first winner for this scholarship, man, back in May. This little girl named Megan. Man, Megan's mother is a school teacher. Her dad is a disabled veteran. And right now she's sitting in classes at Texas A&M. She's going to be an engineer one day, man. So, yeah, I finally found Muhammad. It took 7 years to find that guy.
At where we left off earlier, you're speaking at these college events or locker rooms and whatever you're being invited to and getting these opportunities to speak. Then you write the book. The book goes,
Viral.
viral off the charts globally. What other things began to happen for you once that started to happen?
Man, one of the things that happened in my life is I got married, man. I didn't ever think I was going to ever have a family, because like you sit in prison, you've got a really low self-esteem, a low self-worth. And you don't think that anybody will ever find you worthy of marriage, or that if you found somebody, their family wouldn't like you. But man plans and God laughs, brother. I mean, I got an incredible wife and stepdaughter. I've got in-laws that love me. So yeah, became a family man, became an entrepreneur. Got a movie deal going with Dak Prescott's got his own production company. So Dak Prescott and I became pretty good friends and business partners along the road down here. I got a prison curriculum that I started. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice reached out to me during COVID, wanted to know if they could create a prison curriculum that would teach men and women who are incarcerated how to think like me, because they hold me up as kind of the standard for a parolee in the state of Texas. I'm one of the most visible people they have that rehabilitation works. And so I've got a prison curriculum that is being piloted in one of the Texas prisons, and it'll probably be in every Texas prison at some point in the next couple of years. I went back to school. I got a master's in criminal justice, and I've become a professor at the University of Houston downtown. Get this, Dennis, teaching a class called Prisons in America. Like, I'm the only professor on earth to teach a prisons class at a university who lived in prison. Man, I've got law enforcement officers in my class. I've got people that work in the prison. I've got prison guards, man, people that were over me at one point, not them specifically, but their position. I've got, everybody that you can think of that wants to be a future criminal justice practitioner takes my prisons class, and they get to hear about prison from a little different perspective, because most prison classes are taught by someone who worked in the criminal justice system one way or another, maybe a former law enforcement officer, maybe a former warden. But to hear it from a guy that didn't go home at night, didn't get to leave there, but stayed there and lived there for almost a decade, it's a whole different perspective, man. So yeah, I get a chance to be a change agent in a lot of different ways in this life, man. It's just, I cannot believe this is my life, Dennis. I tell my wife that almost every day.
My next question was, can you believe it?
No, man, I can't believe it, brother. But here's the thing. Here's the formula. And this is the secret sauce. The more you go out and give of yourself, the more you go out and serve other people, the better your life will be. This guy told me at an AA meeting one time, he said, Damon, if we could take all of our problems and go throw them onto a pile, then we could go to the pile and we could just pick up anybody else's problem we want. You know what you would do when you saw the problems that people carry around? You'd go grab your problem and stick it back over your shoulder and walk off with it and be happy for your problems. In life, I know that the three hardest words for a human being to say to another human being, I need help. I need help. So what I know from that is that everybody around me needs help. There's people struggling with stuff all the time. I'm just on the move every day looking for ways to serve other people and be kind. I have a prayer that I started praying when I got into prison. I got into recovery. And this prayer sets my day up. Every single morning I say, I've never missed a day since I started praying in 2011 in a dungeon. I get on my knees and say, hey, God, put in front of me what you need me to do today for you. And let me recognize that when I see it, because I don't want to miss whatever that is. And that's it, man. That's what I pray for every day. And as long as I'm looking for ways to serve other people, my life is incredible.
What's your message for somebody who might be experiencing one of the most difficult times of their life? How does one find hope during those times?
My message for that person that's experiencing difficulties is this, that the world only seems hopeless. It's seemingly hopeless. It's why the movie Shawshank Redemption was such a great movie, right? Because it was a story about hope. Because the main character of the movie is really this guy named Red, who lost hope a long time ago. But then this guy named Andy Dufresne comes into the prison and he restores hope. And he tells him, get busy living or get busy dying. And that's kind of the same message I tell people when they're struggling in life. Focus on the things you have to be grateful for in life. Focus on the gratitude. A good friend of mine named Lee Brower, he's one of these personal development coaches. Lee says this, big, every day go big. Begin in gratitude. Start your day off in a place where you're grateful for what you have and not worried about the things you don't. or
Mm.
struggling with the things you don't. Focus on the good, because here's the deal. It's impossible to be stressed and blessed at the same time. It's very hard to do that. But your mindset's everything. Dennis, your mind is how you think determines the way you act in the world you see around you. It's like traffic. Sometimes you sit in traffic and the traffic doesn't bother you at all. But then there's other times you sit in traffic and it drives you insane. Is it the traffic or is it you? And I would say it's you. It's always you and how you see the obstacle in front of you. So,
Well, I think it's clear that it's us, because I could be in a same situation as somebody else and have a whole different perspective, even though they're experiencing the same exact thing. And what
Correct.
comes to mind is, like, I'll tell a quick story. I was flying to Texas and we were in Newark Airport. And, for me, nothing's really ever that timely that I have to race somewhere or rush somewhere. I do it for work and give myself enough time before I have to be somewhere to get there. And so what happens is every time a flight's delayed, everybody's phone rings at the same time. So I hear everybody's phone buzz or beep. And so the first delay comes over and, it's like 15 minutes. Then 10 minutes into that, another delay comes, and I see this lady close to me. And this is years and years ago, and she's huffing. And, then I see it happens again. But these weren't like 2-hour delays. I mean, it's getting hit 15 minutes, 20 minutes. It's nothing crazy. And so on the third or fourth one, she just exclaims out loud, "Oh my God, could you?" But now everybody's recognizing how worked up she's getting. Some people are getting a little frustrated, but this woman was, and she was actually like a hippie looking lady too, oddly enough. So she wasn't the most zen one there. And, I just was accounting for her acting like this. And I was completely calm, just continuing work. I had plenty of stuff to do. And so when she exclaimed this in front of all these people in this terminal, I went, "You could have cancer, And she looked at me, I'm like, "Yeah, you could have cancer, except our flight here in America, in our first world country, where you can go right down the hall right now and get drinks and food and anything you want, is delayed by an hour. But it seems like the end of the world for some of us." And she's like, "Well, I just have somewhere to go." I go, "We all have somewhere to go, but nothing we do is going to change the fact that this plane's going to get here when this plane gets here."
right.
And so what I said earlier was, you could have cancer. Think about that. You could have cancer. If this is your problem, right? If this is your biggest problem right now, man, you're lucky.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's perspective. You hit her over the head with perspective, man. Perspective on what a bad day looks like. Hey, and on your example, this is like travel tip. We'll just insert here. When you get those texts that a plane is delayed or whatever, you get an entire plane of people that all got the same text at the same time. You got to separate emotion from the moment, man, and calmly figure out, how am I going to get on the next possible flight out of this airport? Because now I got an entire plane of people who can do the same thing. And that has served me so well. And I learned a lot about controlling my emotions inside of a prison, man, because reacting to a situation, you're a cop. You know this, man. You can't react on emotion, man. Emotion is bad, man. Emotion's a very bad thing. So, yeah, man, I feel you on that.
Well, and that's really a great strength when people have the emotional intelligence to just don't do anything, just stand there. And so anything that's big in my life that I have to make thoughts about, or whatever it may be, a big decision, I take quite a lot of time before I make that decision, unless it's completely and utterly necessary that I do it at that moment. But outside of that, dude, any major thoughts that I have regarding where this business is going or anything that I might have to do, I just put some thought into it. I sometimes take a weekend to think about it. And I can't emphasize that enough. And, to be honest with you, I think a lot of times my emotional intelligence, or my EQ, turns some people off in some sense. Well, other people might find it admirable. I think other people think that, like, "Oh, who does he think he is?" in some sense. And now I really try to practice non-judgment as much as possible. So, with that practice in place, I don't let anything really work me up too much. I've been brought to my knees in the past couple of years for sure. And I've never thought in my life I'd endure some things that actually brought me to my knees, but I'm glad I went there, because it's made me a significantly better human being, and it's made me appreciate everything in my life just that much more.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good stuff, man.
What's a message for law enforcement? You have an opportunity to deliver it to hundreds of thousands of cops that listen to this. What would you like to say to them from a guy who's been through what you've been through and who you are now?
My message for law enforcement is that I know your job is hard. But your job is important. And we got a society right now that kind of has their head up their ass when it comes to this, but you're appreciated. And a few bad apples cannot destroy an entire profession. So I would encourage law enforcement to, you know, to tough this out. This will pass, and know that you have three choices how you want to respond to this pot of boiling water you're in, because you're in a pot of boiling water. There's no doubt. Law enforcement has the toughest jobs of anybody else in society. Here's why. In law enforcement, every interaction you have starts out on a negative. That's it, man. It's negative. People see a badge and a gun, a uniform, they shut down. You've got to work extra hard in law enforcement just to get to zero in this conversation, right? But don't quit. Don't give up, because your jobs are so important. I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for law enforcement going out there that day and doing their job to bring me to justice, or bring justice to me, is what I would say. Your job is noble. You matter. And people like me that have been on the other side of you understand how important it is what you do. And just know this, man, you've got a choice. You can let your environment turn you soft like the carrot, or hard like the egg, or you can be like that coffee bean. This changes the world around you, and use positivity as an advantage. And the smile on your face, the energy the expression on your face can change the energy inside you. That's one of the ways of being a coffee bean, man. Smile as much as you can, everywhere you can. Change the energy inside you and around you.
I don't frequently put thought into who's going to be on my podcast in the morning, but over the weekend I had looked at my calendar and what my week looked like, and I saw that you were on here today, and I was like, man, as soon as I woke up, I'm like, there's going to be something really good about this. And I wanted to really work with you to share that message of what you just said. Just want to say I appreciate you so much for taking the time to come on here, and the message penetrates into the ears of those who need to hear it the most. And dude, it's an amazing story. You should be very, very proud. And so we're proud of you from the law enforcement side. I want you to know that.
Oh man, I appreciate that. That means a lot, Dennis, because I want law enforcement to see the example of someone that got it right, man, because there's other Damon West out there. I don't know how many there are. I met some good people in prison that made some bad choices, and people can change. And we are supposed to be a nation of second chances and forgiveness. And yeah, I think that's great, man. I'm really, yeah, if I can impact even just one person in your audience today, this is well worth my time. This is the answer to that prayer that I prayed this morning, for God to put in front of me what He needed me to do today for Him. Let me recognize it when I see it. So thanks for the opportunity to serve, brother.
Man, it's been great. Thank you. It's a real pleasure meeting you, and not just listening to you in an audience of 3,000 people.
Yeah. Yeah, man. And I got another guy I'm going to send your way named Ryan Tillman, a good friend of mine. He has this thing out in LA, Breaking Barriers United. He's on social media and all this stuff, but he's a former law enforcement officer. And he does these videos where he puts people on the other side. Like, oh, you want to see what cops go through? Well, you get to be the cop or pulling someone over, and the cop will be the bad guy. And yeah, Ryan's a good friend of mine, man. I'm going to set you up with Ryan.
Yeah, set him over.
Podcast. Yeah, man. Yeah, he'll put you on his too.
All right, excellent, man. That's awesome. Appreciate it, brother. Have a great one. Happy holidays, dude. Enjoy it. You earned it. Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dennis.
All right, Damon. See you, buddy.
See you, buddy.